The Biden administration has made a momentous decision, one shrouded in secrecy and carrying enormous implications. The US has quietly authorized Ukrainian forces to use American-supplied weapons for targeted counterstrikes against Russian territory near Kharkiv. This revelation marks a turning point in the conflict, escalating the stakes and pushing the boundaries of US involvement. It signals a new phase in the war, one where the line between defense and offense blurs. The decision has been met with a mix of anxiety and cautious optimism among Western allies. Some fear it could provoke a wider conflict with Russia, while others argue it is a necessary step to deter further aggression. The Biden administration, walking a tightrope between supporting Ukraine and avoiding a direct confrontation with Russia, has insisted that the weapons are to be used solely for defensive purposes. However, the distinction between defense and offense becomes increasingly ambiguous in the fog of war. The use of US weapons inside Russia, even for limited counterstrikes, raises profound questions about the future trajectory of the conflict. It injects a dangerous new element into an already volatile situation, with the potential to escalate tensions between nuclear-armed powers. The White House has remained tight-lipped about the specific details of the authorization, emphasizing the need for operational security. This calculated silence, while understandable, also fuels uncertainty and speculation. The lack of transparency raises concerns about mission creep and the potential for the conflict to spiral out of control. As the war enters a critical new phase, the Biden administration faces the daunting task of managing a complex and unpredictable situation, where every decision carries enormous weight and the consequences of miscalculation could be catastrophic. The decision to allow Ukraine to strike Russian territory, while risky, reflects a strategic calculus based on several factors. Firstly, it aims to disrupt and degrade Russia's ability to sustain its offensive operations. By targeting key logistical hubs and supply lines inside Russia, Ukrainian forces can hinder the Kremlin's war effort and potentially force a reassessment of its strategic objectives. This approach seeks to level the playing field, giving Ukraine more leverage in any future negotiations. Secondly, the authorization sends a clear message of resolve to both Moscow and Kiev. It demonstrates the United States' unwavering commitment to Ukraine's defense and serves as a warning to Russia against further escalation. The Biden administration is signaling that it is willing to take calculated risks to support Ukraine and deter further aggression. This calibrated approach seeks to impose costs on Russia without triggering a wider conflagration. Thirdly, the timing of the decision is significant. It comes at a moment when Russia's offensive in eastern Ukraine appears to be faltering, with its forces bogged down and facing stiff resistance. By providing Ukraine with the means to strike back, the US aims to capitalize on Russia's vulnerabilities and hasten the end of the conflict. This strategy of limited escalation seeks to maximize pressure on Russia while minimizing the risk of a wider war. However, this approach is not without its critics. Some argue that it risks provoking a disproportionate response from Moscow, potentially leading to a dangerous escalation spiral. Others contend that it could backfire, hardening Russia's resolve and prolonging the conflict. The Biden administration must carefully calibrate its support to Ukraine, finding the delicate balance between deterring Russian aggression and avoiding actions that could lead to a wider war. The Kremlin's response to Ukraine's use of US weapons on Russian soil has been carefully calibrated, a mix of bluster and restraint that reflects the difficult choices facing Vladimir Putin. Publicly, the Kremlin has condemned the strikes as an act of international terrorism and threatened unpredictable consequences. However, Russia has so far refrained from a major escalation, focusing instead on intensifying its military campaign in eastern Ukraine. This measured response suggests that Putin, while angered by the strikes, recognizes the risks of a direct confrontation with NATO. Russia is already bogged down in a costly and protracted war, and an expanded conflict with the West is not in its strategic interests. Moreover, Putin is likely wary of provoking a stronger response from NATO, which has thus far shown remarkable unity and resolve in its support for Ukraine. However, Putin's calculus could change if he perceives a direct threat to his regime or the territorial integrity of Russia. The strikes inside Russia, even if limited in scope, represent a symbolic blow and could embolden Ukraine and its Western backers. Putin may feel compelled to respond more forcefully to deter further attacks and maintain his image as a strong leader. The coming weeks and months will be crucial in determining how this dangerous new phase of the conflict unfolds. The Biden administration must remain vigilant in its support for Ukraine while also engaging in direct diplomacy with Moscow to manage tensions and prevent a catastrophic escalation. The stakes are incredibly high, with the potential for miscalculation and unintended consequences looming large. Section 4. A new era of warfare. The conflict in Ukraine is not merely a regional conflict. It is a watershed moment in international relations, potentially ushering in a new era of warfare. The use of sophisticated Western weaponry by a non-NATO member against a nuclear-armed power has few precedents in modern history. It raises profound questions about the rules of engagement in the 21st century and the future of global security. One of the most significant implications of this conflict is the erosion of traditional norms against targeting a country's territory. While Ukraine's use of US weapons has been limited to areas near its border, it sets a dangerous precedent that could encourage other states to engage in similar actions. This could lead to a more unpredictable and volatile security environment, where the threat of cross-border attacks becomes more commonplace. Moreover, the conflict highlights the increasing role of technology and information warfare in modern conflicts. From sophisticated drones and cyber attacks to the use of social media for propaganda and disinformation, the lines between conventional and unconventional warfare are becoming increasingly blurred. This poses new challenges for international law and institutions, which are struggling to adapt to the rapidly evolving nature of conflict. The conflict in Ukraine also underscores the importance of alliances and partnerships in an era of renewed great power competition. NATO's response to Russia's aggression has been remarkably unified, demonstrating the enduring value of collective defense in the face of shared threats. However, the alliance faces difficult questions about its future role and purpose, particularly as China continues to assert itself on the global stage. Section 5. American Public Opinion and the Risks of Mission Creep. The Biden administration's decision to provide Ukraine with advanced weaponry for use on Russian territory carries significant domestic political risks. While there is broad bipartisan support for aiding Ukraine, public opinion is more divided on the issue of direct military intervention. The administration must tread carefully to avoid the perception of mission creep, which could erode public support for the war effort. Public opinion polls consistently show that Americans are wary of direct US military involvement in the conflict. While a majority of Americans support providing Ukraine with weapons and financial assistance, there is far less appetite for deploying US troops or engaging in direct combat operations against Russian forces. The administration must be mindful of this sentiment as it calibrates its response to the crisis. The risks of mission creep are particularly acute given the complex and unpredictable nature of the conflict. What began as a limited military operation by Russia has escalated into a protracted and bloody war with no end in sight. The longer the conflict drags on, the greater the risk that the United States will be drawn further into the fighting, potentially leading to a wider conflagration with Russia. The Biden administration must therefore clearly articulate its objectives in Ukraine and level with the American people about the potential costs and risks of continued involvement. It must also work closely with Congress to ensure that any escalation of US military support for Ukraine has the backing of both the legislative and executive branches. Failure to do so could undermine public support for the war effort and damage America's credibility on the world stage. Section 6. Walking a tightrope. The Biden administration is walking a tightrope in Ukraine, balancing the imperative to support a democratic nation under attack with the need to avoid a wider conflict with Russia. The decision to allow Ukraine to strike Russian territory with US weapons reflects this delicate balancing act, a calculated risk aimed at deterring further aggression while managing the risk of escalation. The stakes could not be higher. The conflict in Ukraine has already had a profound impact on the international order, shattering long-held assumptions about European security and raising the specter of nuclear confrontation. The Biden administration must navigate this complex and dangerous landscape with prudence, resolve, and a clear-eyed understanding of both the opportunities and the risks involved. Success in Ukraine will require a multifaceted strategy that combines robust military support for Kyiv with sustained diplomatic engagement with Moscow. The United States must continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons it needs to defend itself, while also working with allies to impose crippling economic sanctions on Russia. At the same time, the Biden administration must keep the door open to diplomacy, seeking to de-escalate tensions and find a negotiated solution to the conflict. The road ahead will be long and arduous, with no easy answers or guaranteed outcomes. However, by remaining clear-eyed about the challenges and committed to its principles, the United States can help Ukraine defend its freedom and sovereignty while upholding the rules-based international order that has been so shaken by Russia's aggression.